At the end of 2018, Congress passed a bill that would bestow Chinese and Chinese American World War II veterans with a Congressional Gold Medal in recognition of their service for the country while the Chinese Exclusion Act was still in place. Without the ability to become a citizen at the time, these soldiers did not have their service permanently recorded, leaving organizations such as the Chinese American World War II Veterans Recognition Project to slowly put the pieces back together today. As volunteers continue to dig for clues as to who the approximately 20,000 Chinese American veterans are, the families of Chinese American veterans are also stepping up to share their stories.
My father's name was Guy Gordon Chen, and he served in the U.S. Army Air Corps, the China-Burma-India Theater of Operations, 14th Air Force Chinese American Composite Wing.
The stories and experiences of these Chinese American veterans are intertwined with their dual identities.
He thought that during the war he was treated like a traitor from the Chinese because he was in China, Burma, China, and India. Mostly because they thought of him as one of those traitor Americans who was doing the wrong thing, but he wasn't.
These differences have a significant impact on how the war is portrayed today and what stories are being told.
Well, many of my friends always had stories about what the wartime was like. They were not Chinese, and they were talking about, the Battle of Normandy and all the action going on in Europe. But, most of the Chinese who were served in Burma, China, India never talked about it. It was the forgotten war. It wasn't like it was written up in books and movies and anything like that.
For what happened in the Asian front of the war, there are much fewer movies and artifacts in pop culture today. Instead of diving into history books and records, Chinese American families have instead turned to personal anecdotes to stay connected with this history.
And he wanted to be a pilot. Unfortunately, my dad was not a great student. My dad was happy-go-lucky. He did not get through pilot training. In fact, there was an incident where he was on, I believe it was a link trainer simulator. After it was over, his flight session was over, he asked his instructor pilot, "How am I doing, sir? How am I doing?" And the instructor pilot said, "Well, Lieutenant, you've been flying into the ground for the last 15 minutes, so Dad was not going to be made into a pilot." But he did end up serving as a tail gunner, an aircraft mechanic, and the motor pool driver. He was in the armory all the time, or whenever they needed a motor pool driver for the generals.
But the story of these veterans and their families didn't end with the war. Anecdotes about the struggles of living in American society during and after the war would highlight the hardships that these families would continue to face, oftentimes because of their Chinese heritage.
During the war, money was really tight. When you're talking about people making money, I believe it was maybe a couple $100s a month. That's all they made. During the war, my mother and my Aunt Marion lived with his sister in San Francisco, so there were 3 wives living there with babies. After the war, they lived in San Francisco. I asked one of my aunts why they were living in San Francisco, and I thought they were from San Jose. She says, "Well, you know that Chinese couldn't buy property, and they didn't have any ownings of anything, so you went wherever you could."
As time progressed, veterans began to settle back into society, and Chinese American families also began moving towards advancing their standard of living.
The GI Bill and VA loans enabled them to buy a house in Oak Park, which was spacious considered at the time. It was your usual 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 930 square foot house, but it was certainly larger than anything they ever got in San Francisco.
As the Chinese American community continued to make strides in their civil rights and economic status, it also took a page from other Asian American communities in learning that we have come to a crucial juncture to recognize the generation's sacrifices while they're still present. Rising to the challenge was the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, which worked to lobby Congress for a Congressional Gold Medal and started the Chinese American World War II Veterans Recognition Project.
So what I determined then back in 2016, and I said, there's something that we haven't done is to recognize the war effort and sacrifice that these men and women did during World War II. And I said, well, Chinese Americans were there, were in existence at the same time. They served in the war. They did the very same things everybody else did. It's just that they didn't get any recognition for it. So I decided to embark upon this effort. And so I had a lot of advice from my Nisei and Filipino counterparts who, when they passed the Congressional Gold Medal bills for their World War II veterans, they gave me a lot of really, great advice. So we did a lot of hill walking, letter writing, really grassroots advocacy to get this done. So the bill got introduced in 2017. It miraculously took only one session of Congress, basically 2 years, for us to get all these people together and everybody to sign on. And at the end of 2018, I think President Trump signed the bill into law. We'll have the Congressional Gold Medal being presented to our Chinese American World War II veterans. To date, we have found almost 3,000 World War II veterans or families, actually it's mostly families now, surviving family members who have registered on our website. So at some point in time when the virus thing gets out of the way, we'll have a ceremony in Washington, D.C.
As the project continues into the future, it is up to the rest of the younger Chinese American community to amplify the effect of this outreach.
We're certainly encouraging that. I don't know if the goal eventually is going to be we'll be able to get it into history books or some kind of education curriculum, but I think at the very least it should be available either through libraries or like through your Asian American Studies programs. So the Library of Congress already has a Veterans History Project. You can actually search for quite a few stories of Chinese American World War II veterans in there. So I have my father, my uncle, and a friend of ours in there already, so you can kind of see what they already have. You know, it's all about visibility. What we can do is show everyone through these stories that we all have a commonality of experience, and whether that's serving in the war, fighting for the country, demonstrating patriotism. I think the only thing you can do is demonstrate that our commonality and purpose as citizens of this country, as people of a community, of a neighborhood, of an apartment building, whatever it is that we're contributing in the same way as everyone else. So they don't look at our face anymore.
I'm glad the efforts of my dad and the 249 men who served with him is being recognized. I knew very little about what went on over there, and I couldn't find much written about it, but I did understand about what the planes looked like, sort of what the conditions were like. And I'm really proud to see that the sketch of the medal that he will be awarded has a picture of the Flying Tiger plane.